Thanks for pressing play. This is Saints of Cinema. I'm Timothy Winterstein.
And I'm Jay Winterstein.
You can get a hold of us. Send us an email, saintsofcinemapod@gmail.com. No one does, but you could. Facebook, X, although I haven't been keeping up with X. But you can also find us there. Instagram, and go to our website, saintsofcinema.com. This is episode 82.
Nice.
What should we call this?
Finding Christ in animated films.
Okay. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. But
sometimes you gotta look a little harder.
You know, I'm a big fan of our last episode, so go check that out with Pastor Jason Swan. And we talked about the film Sinners. If you haven't had a chance to listen, I would check that one out. But we watched a couple of animated films, thought of a couple more. It's an interesting thing because you have you probably have a more basic story, right, with animated films. And I think for that reason, you're much more likely to have kind of a traditional story arc. And a lot of times that has to do with sort of I don't know what you would say, sort of a problem redemption kind of thing. And a lot of times, and I think the other thing with animated films, you're not gonna have like obvious like death and destruction, and so you might have more opportunity to bring somebody back to life or something similar. So anyway, what Jay? What are the films we looked at?
All right, so the first one, which is one that I'd kind of wanted to get at the end of our 1999 series, we never actually got to it, but The Iron Giant, which is one I actually hadn't seen. It's one that's been on my radar. I'd heard a lot about it, and so it was nice to finally get to watch that one. And then the other one was one that nearly won Best Animated Film last year, or at the last Oscars, which was The Wild Robot. It was the one that, if you happen to remember, it's the one Tim was bawling his eyes out at the theater. I mean.
Did I say that?
And then
I don't think that's what happened.
May or may not have happened. The other one is one that maybe a little unexpected in the group, but it's CROODS 2. So the reason I brought up CROODS 2, we do like Friday night movie nights at our house. So, and all right, I usually fall asleep. I think a couple weeks ago we were watching like the Hannah Montana movie or something. So I don't get to ever pick these movies. It's obviously for the kids.
They don't
except for the Hannah Montana one. No.
Yeah, that's the one you picked.
That is the one I got in.
Your wife is like, no, you're not picking these. That's the same in my house, Jay. I don't get to pick movies that the family watches. They are hesitant. I mean, I couldn't even watch with my daughter. She's like, no, we're not watching that. We're watching a James Bond movie. So I don't
Dude,
know to.
I would take a James Bond movie.
I mean, we did. We watched James Bond, but I wanted to watch Tommy Boy because earlier in the day, I forget what happened, but I was like, fat man in a little coat. And so I was like, let's watch Tommy Boy. And she's like, no, we're watching James Bond.
Overruled again.
All right. Okay. So neither of us get to pick movies in our own house.
All right.
That the family watches.
So, for some reason, I managed to stay awake during CROODS 2. Actually, not that bad a film. Kind of liked it. It's a good film. It's got some solid stuff going on there. I kind of like the first one, too. So, anyways, CROODS 2, we're watching it, and I look at, I don't know, maybe a third of the way through, halfway through or something. I looked at my kids, and I was like, oh, it's the story of Adam and Eve. They kind of looked at me like, what? And then I think my middle kid looks up and is like, Carrie, Dad says this one's the story of Adam and Eve. What, Jay? I was like, Yeah, it's the story of Adam and Eve. They're the Garden of Eden. Really? It's like, yeah, it's right there.
Did your daughter call your wife by her first name?
No, no.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's why that one was kind of thrown into the mix because and then I looked it up. I looked to see if anyone had any insight on this, and I really couldn't find anything. I found someone who made us. There was like a one sentence mention of like the biblical roots of Adam and Eve within CROODS to A New Age, but I think that was about the extent of it. I couldn't find anything else. So, anyways, what this comes to, so how I kind of broke this up. I see these films kind of in two different categories, I guess. So there's the film like CROODS 2 where it has fairly obvious, at least to me, connection to a biblical story. But I don't think it's not seeming to say any larger statement about God or God's love or like specific Christian themes, or there's no real Christ figure in it, as opposed to Iron Giant and Wild Robot, which I think they explore Christian themes a little more heavily. So I think it's just interesting to look at something like CROODS 2 that tells a biblical story, but doesn't seem to say anything larger about God or the Bible. And then there's, the other side of it they're a little more explicit in their biblical teachings.
Yeah, which is interesting that both of those, Iron Giant and Wild Robot, involve robots.
That's another. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I mean, that's sort of like, okay, so there's some sort of not human, but they sort of become human, or they have sort of a human characteristic, but they both come from some other place. In both of those movies, they come from, one comes from outer space as sort of a invading robot, or like that was the intention, apparently. I mean, there's some hints that the intention in Iron Giant was this, he has sort of flashbacks, I guess, if you could call it that, or images or visions of what it could have been. And in the Wild Robot, the robot comes from kind of another place. It's not meant to be in that place.
Right.
So sort of how you take it, you have a robot, a non-human thing, coming into a not necessarily a human situation, at least in the Wild Robot, but so a different world. So I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's sort of I get just get a little nervous about Christ figures. I mean, this has sort of been a common thing in movies and among Christians who sort of want to, like, let's talk about movies. I mean, how many? It actually annoys me. The people when people will do, like, there are churches that will do sermon series on movies. I'm like, okay, you ran out of stuff in the Bible, I guess, so you got to do popular culture. So it sort of annoys me, but it ends up being like there is a searching for a Christ figure, and how can we do? And I think we talked about this actually with our 1999 movies. In fact, maybe the first episode when we talked about The Matrix. The number of sort of things, to me, in my memory, I'm sure it happened at other points, but in my memory, The Matrix was one of the very first movies that sort of spawned like books talking about the Christian connections. Now, Matrix has all sorts of combination of weird, or not weird, I guess, but of sort of a combination of sort of religious stuff going on. It's not, in other words, it's not just Christianity in that movie. But if you're looking at it from a Christian perspective, Neo Trinity. I mean, what Nebuchadnezzar? What's the ship? Is it?
Yeah, I think it is the Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got like biblical references that make you think in those terms. But the wider question is, I guess, for me, one of the questions is, do people? I mean, is it only that Christians see these sort of connections? Like if you're just watching, and the reason I say that is because I think of something like the Chronicles of Narnia, which is C.S. Lewis clearly intends that to have, especially The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The climax of the book is so obviously a Christian, if not an allegory. I mean, pretty close. You've got the I mean, the lion Aslan is meant to be the Christ figure throughout. And he explicitly says this in other places. But but I've heard of people who read the Chronicles of Narnia and do read it as a fictional series and don't even pick up at all that this is a Christian. Now that may be a cultural thing. That may be the changes in sort of how biblically literate maybe people are, but I also think that if you're sort of shaped and formed as a Christian or as a sort of by the Bible or whatever, you're going to notice those things more. I take this is an article I've sort of read a couple times and come to appreciate this essay by this guy named Stephen Kreitz, the narrative experience of reality, where he the narrative quality of experience. Sorry, where he basically says that everybody has their sacred story, and every other story that we tell it resonates with that wider sacred story. So, but I think this works not only for the stories that we tell, but how we hear or read stories. So that when somebody watches a film story or reads a literary story, it's going to resonate more or less with that person based on what their wider sacred story is. Now, sacred in this sense doesn't necessarily mean religious. It just means the story of everything that person kind of holds to. So, and I think this is true. So, when we're watching movies, it sort of naturally comes to us as Christians, let's say, that we sort of experience these things according to the stories that are the narrative story or the fictional story that we know, sacred story that we know. So, anyway, that's just one thing I wonder about. So then, this is something that other people experience.
Okay, so then, so if there is like this Christ figure, and so I don't know, let's use the example of like the Iron Giant, which I think is, I don't know, I think it's a fairly clear example of. Mm-hmm. I mean, Superman, I guess, has always also been used as one, which, in the film, they kind of the Iron Giant alludes to, this film. Yes. Superman even brings out the S on his chest and everything. So if you take this Christ figure in a film and someone who doesn't believe in it sees this, well, I don't know, what's the point, I guess? Or what is there what's the takeaway for that? If the filmmaker consciously puts this in there and says, I'm a Christian, I want to show, tell the story of God's love and how he sacrificed himself, died, resurrected, all this stuff. And then someone's like, oh yeah, I mean, that's a good story. I don't know, I guess what's the impact? And is it still impactful? Is there still a purpose in it? I think the answer might be still yes, is because you're just reinforcing biblical values, and whether or not you realize it at that time, I think it's still good, and I think it's still something that's going to stick with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could speculate. Like, okay, so the giant, the Iron Man. Now, I don't know. I don't read the book that it's based on, and I don't know about either the author of that book or the filmmaker. So I guess I don't know for sure what they were aiming at. I mean, there's some Cold War stuff. There's a, nuclear threat.
Yeah.
There's a kind of this. So I mean, in other words, you could. How might you interpret it? You could interpret it as people are afraid of something foreign that they don't understand, and this is sort of embodied by the government. I'm from the government guy. It's sort of embodied by him that he is that anything outside that's unknown, that we should be afraid of automatically, and therefore we should work to get rid of it. So you could interpret it that way, I think. I mean, you could take the giant as the Iron Guy as the representation of something that people are afraid of, but they don't necessarily need to be, and we should all get along, or something like that. And because it's the story, you don't want the giant who's become part of a major part of the story to be gone forever, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to just explode, and maybe particularly for children, you don't want the Iron and the children. So the children are going to be like, put themselves in the place of Hogarth, right? And if they were to meet this guy, they don't want him to sort of just be destroyed and nothing, So I think you could read it that way. You could interpret it that way. But I think, yeah, it's a good question.
I think also one of the main things, and I think maybe a larger read of the film is, I guess when he made the film, he wanted to make it, one of his big things was an anti-gun or anti-gun stances, like anti-military and attack and all this, which I think comes across too. So I don't...
Yeah. I'm not a gun.
Right. But, there's a couple interesting things in there. They pray before they eat, which I thought was interesting. Mm-hmm. And then there's also that comment where he says, what's he say about the souls? Good things have souls, and they go on forever and ever and never die.
Which is not exactly an Orthodox Christian perspective on souls.
But
well, I mean, Christians believe that all things, especially particularly humans, whether they're good or not, right? So
true.
I mean,
yeah, okay, right. But just alluding to some
some eternal life or afterlife or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. So I mean, there certainly are like places where, and we're sort of inclined, like we are with things like "Are you the one" in the Matrix, or Trinity, or whatever. We're inclined, because there are connections to biblical or Christian things, to start to think that way about it. Like, wait a second. Okay, they're praying. Maybe there's something going on here. And so, I think, so in other words, you're not doing it without any warrant at all. You're not like reading into it some sort of Christian thing that has no, it's always been interesting to me that the Hunger Games, there's no reference to religion or gods at all. Like, Christian or otherwise, they're like the people in that world have no religious or spiritual sort of, and I think that strikes me as an anomaly. Like, almost, I mean, I don't know, I can barely think of some movie or some story that doesn't have either a positive or negative. I mean, it could certainly easily be a reaction against Christianity or religion or whatever. But it's interesting. Like, if you watch movies or shows or whatever, So Jay, if you watch any of those,
If you've seen
like
a movie,
have you seen a movie? Because like it's surprising how many movies or shows God shows up when you're like, what? Wait, what? Like, why are you why are you all of a sudden talking about God? Like, I can't, and it's almost a cliche for me when I see a movie or a show and somebody would be like, do you believe in that there is a God or something along those lines? Like,
right.
like that becomes a question. It's almost a question to like move the plot along sometimes. And so I don't know what you would call that. But it's surprising how often something like that shows up, and it's not really like set up for it. Like you're not suddenly like, why would you be talking about religion right now? But it often happens, I think, in like horror movies or in sort of like in a calm period of a total like a war movie or whatever. Like you just suddenly have this. There's somebody they're sort of thinking or talking about things that are deeper, but so to have something where that's not raised in any way is interesting. But
well, I think at its core, I mean, there's themes that come from the Bible that are just part of like good storytelling. I think just this whole good versus evil, which I mean.
Yeah.
Anytime you see good versus evil in a film, I don't think you're automatically like, oh, that's Jesus Satan right there. That's I see what they're doing. I see it. Or I mean, other thing, redemption, sacrifice, which are obviously big in the Bible. And I don't know that necessarily anytime it shows up in a film that's like a direct relation to, oh, we're trying to show you Jesus in our film. So I don't know. It's always interesting whether when you see these kind of themes and you bring them back to the Bible, and whether there was intent behind it and what that intent was in showing that figure and what they want the outcome, or I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to tell a good story and it just happens to have its roots in biblical principles.
And I mean, if you buy into the Christian story, the fact is that there really finally is, like, if you believe the claims of the Christian religion, there's finally only one story. There's the story of God's creation and redemption and making holy of what's gone wrong. So in some way or another, Christians would claim that you're sort of working with or against that story in every story that's being told. And the best stories would have some connection to the greatest story ever told. Someone said that. But I mean, so there would be some connection, I think, in those terms, at least for Christians. But again, I think it's a matter of like what are you sort of looking for? And honestly, some of those things are things that get associated with Christianity that are not actually part of it. For example, you brought up good versus evil. And so a lot of the things that are sort of like where you have clear good guys and clear bad guys, white hats and black hats or something, then you've got this sort of idea set up where this is the way people view or the way that they view how Christians view themselves, or something along those lines, that they are the good guys and the other people are the bad guys. And so then you have what you have a lot of times, I think, is are tropes of reversing that, where you have like an anti-hero or something, where you have somebody who's not good, so to speak, out to be the hero. And so at first that sort of sounds like it might be the reverse of the Christian story, right? Where you have somebody who's perfectly good saving people who are not. But honestly, this is the thing that bothers me a little bit, is that when you have so-called Christ figures or Christ types or whatever people might, figures is probably usually what people say. There's only one Jesus. I mean, as far as Christians are concerned. So as soon as you have a type of Christ or a figure of Christ, a representation of that, but it's not Jesus, then you're off the topic. You're off the rails. And so my personally, what I prefer is not so much to talk about figures of Christ, but figures of Christians. So because ideally, obviously this is not always what happens, but ideally Christians would be something like Jesus. I mean, that's sort of the idea, is that you would do stuff sort of along the lines of what Jesus does. So I think that's actually more fruitful, because unless you're actually depicting Jesus, which is always kind of a fraught thing anyway, you're going to have some issues. Unless you're doing that, you're going to have there's something going to be that's not going to match up. And so then it sort of, to me, it just, like, what's the point of that? And so I think that maybe it's better to lean into images or figures of Christians.
And I think I know that's been the kind of like a bigger topic, I think, when they show these films with like priests in them. What was the Mark Wahlberg one? I forget.
Yeah.
But I think that the Father, I don't know, we talked about it, but I don't know.
Father
But
Stu.
I know that. Oh yeah. Father Stu.
Just kidding.
But I know that's been kind of a theme as well, to show, these quote unquote questioning priests, or priests that have, who aren't the perfect priest. Yeah. I mean, I don't, like that one behind you. What's that say? Calvary. Right. So I think that's been another thing, going along with what you said.
I mean, honestly, this one, it's backwards in my screen. I mean, this might take us off. We're off the animated part right now, but I just want to say, it's interesting to me. I think we probably touched on this multiple times, but I think we touched on it last episode. The movies that Christians or churches go to see are not the ones that I think are the most profoundly Christian.
Okay, are they profoundly Christian to the audiences that are watching them? Or how are they? Because I know where you're going.
I don't know how big the audience is that's watching any of the movies that I think are the most significant. So,
because I want to say that a lot of people that go to these kind of films, I feel like they kind of get out of the film what they went to see. So I don't know. Is that better than going to a film that has like some deeper Christian themes that they're not picking up on?
I don't think it's better. I think that's probably true, and I think that's actually... So, for example, there are some significant differences between, say, Christians who hold to the Nicene Creed. I'll try to be as specific as possible. Christians who hold to the Nicene Creed and Mormons. There are some differences. And yet, you got something like Angel Studios, which is, as far as I know, owned by and run by people who belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So there are some differences there, and yet the movies that Angel Studios is producing are being seen by all sorts of evangelical and other types of Christians. Churches are they're buying tickets, they're renting theaters, etc., etc. I mean, it's an interesting question, because historically, at least, most evangelical Christians would be like, Mormons, maybe we're not on the same page. And yet, sort of things, but then when it's and I think this goes back to a thing about Hollywood in general. Hollywood is the popular perception is Hollywood is against Christianity, and there may be good examples of this. I'm not denying this, but Hollywood's against Christianity, and so we're going to see things that are sort of made outside Hollywood, right? That look good to us. I think this has become more sophisticated. I think you had some movies that were sort of marketed as quote Christian movies that didn't look good and were not well acted, etc., etc. Well, you got things being done. Christians are doing things better. I don't know, however you want to say that. And so I think there is a lot of desire that Christians want to see movies, but they don't want to be like insulted or mocked. And so what they go to see then are things where they know that's not going to happen, regardless of the actual message that's being said. And so
like
I think
safe place.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually what's happening. Is it's this is what I think most Christians mean when they say something like that was edifying or that was a good movie, because a lot of the time I'll be like, was it a good movie? Like was well shot? Like the dialogue was good. It was well written. Like it did something, or is it? No, it might be. I mean, whatever.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
And so I think it's actually more interesting to me at least. Obviously, I mean, we've talked about this 1,000 times, but it's more interesting to me when something sort of is challenging to the just sort of, if you've ever drunk an alcoholic drink and you're like, I didn't even notice the alcohol, right? It just goes down so smoothly. You're like, I didn't notice anything. Or if there's something that's like, I don't know, that was a little rough. This is maybe not the best analogy. So like it goes down so easily that you're like, I don't know if that has any effect on me at all, right? But maybe that's not the way it should be. Maybe there's something else that should be going on. And like you've said, whether it makes you really love it or you really hate it, it does something to you. Like it made you have a reaction in some way or another, and that may be that may be the sign of something that's worth talking about. And so if everybody just says, "Oh, I agreed with everything that made me so happy, so I loved it," that plays into our polarization and just the sort of duality that we make in our world, where it's either us or it's them. So if I don't agree with every single thing that's going on in this, I can't watch it, I can't read it, I can't listen to it, I can't do it, right? Well, maybe that's not how we actually, maybe that's stagnation and not actual thinking about things. Like, you're never challenged. Like, does it challenge you? Oh, no. Actually, what it did was challenge somebody I disagree with. It didn't challenge me, but it said something against somebody I disagree with. So therefore, it's good. I think that's bad. In general, I think that's not. I think we ought to be able to think more clearly and process and digest things, regardless of whether we agree or disagree. Anyway, that's my. I have a problem with getting on the soapbox, but anyway, we should probably get back to the movies we were talking about. But
no, that's good though. Yeah, I mean it's. I think part of that's just rehashing things we've said before, and I think people know if they've heard any of our previous podcasts. I think they know where we stand on God's Not Dead and other films like that versus some things that are gonna make you think and question. So right, good. So one thing,
back to the animated films.
Back to the anim. One thing you did mention before we got started, going back to the film of The Wild Robot, was this idea of vocation. Now, and I know vocation's big to Lutherans, but honestly, I started thinking about it and I was like, well, where did this come from? So I was hoping to get some insight from a Lutheran pastor as to, because it doesn't seem to be brought up in a lot of other denominations, but this idea of vocation. Before we get into Robot, we're gonna tie it into Wild Robot.
I'm actually in a class right now, Theology of Vocation, which kind of covers sort of where everything comes from. And I mean, the basic story is this, that and the basic form of the story is Luther challenged the medieval Roman Church that because at that point vocations, or at least religious vocation, or vocations for Christians, the most important were if you were a monk or a nun or a priest. That's how you are the closest to God. You're devoting yourself to spiritual pursuits, etc., etc. And so, that's what's the holiest type of thing. And so the traditional story is Luther came along and he challenged that, and he said, no, any vocation is holy, which I actually think is a simplification. I think the real thing is every Christian is holy, and therefore the way that they serve their neighbor, that's holy too, because they're holy. So anyway, that's kind of the general story, but it's become it's kind of a major thing. Like, what's the point of work, or how do I decide what I'm going to do, or whatever. So that's kind of that's the overall, that's the broader. But in terms of Lutherans and vocation, I think, and this is what my thought was, the place that I find myself in and the relationships that I have, that's the place where God wants me to be, to serve these people. And honestly, it doesn't matter if I'm a Christian or not, because whatever I'm doing, I'm going to be serving my neighbor. Now, it matters for me whether I'm a Christian, right? So don't hear me wrong. As far as Christians are concerned, it matters whether you're a Christian in terms of your relationship with your Creator. But it doesn't matter in terms of serving your neighbor. God's going, whatever you're doing, I'm sorry, atheists, God's using you to serve your neighbor, whether you realize it or not. Now, you might think you're just doing your job, getting a paycheck, etc. But if you're doing your work and you're doing it well, that's what Lutherans think of as vocation. And so, in terms of the Wild Robot, you have this robot that shows up and gets connected and to this bird, right? And then,
what's it? Bill? What's his name? Bill.
It's been a while since I've seen it.
Bill.
I saw it in the theater. Anyway, but ends up connecting with that relationship, and carrying it out, and no matter what happens, the robot has to finish out her vocation, we would say, toward that. So I think it's an interesting aspect of that. So even though there's a sacrificial aspect to it, this is where I would sort of connect it with Christians rather than with Christ. You have a sacrificial aspect, but it's just in terms of this is what she has to do, so to speak. So.
And I think, that's Bright Bill. That's the person.
Right.
I think more so than other themes, the main theme here is of a parent, is this Roz caring for this Bright Bill. And I think that's where a lot of the emotional attachment comes from. I think it's where a lot of parents also, sympathize with it, and became so attached to this film because they see so much of their role in this role of Roz, because it's really there. You kind of see just the role of the parent, just the whole taking care of them when they're young, and then they kind of reject you when they get a little bit older, and then but just maintaining this unconditional love, even though they may not, love you at that time or understand what's happening at that time.
Yeah.
And then there's that you grow up, and then you leave to go with, I guess you could say college, or I don't know, whatever you want to say. And then
or people that you think are more like you, right?
Right.
And
yes.
people you want to fit in with, or people like there. I mean, there are different ways I think to read that what happens in that movie, but yeah. So where there's a separation that happens in parents and children at some point.
Yeah, and I think it's something. Yeah, obviously that it resonated with a lot of parents, seeing so much of their lives in this bird and the robot, and then the theme of the sacrifice at the end, and then coming back, and then you think, okay, Roz has been reprogrammed, but then still recognizes her kid. And I think maybe even so, I haven't adopted any kids, but I think that's something that I could see adopted parents, resonating with as well, because obviously Roz didn't give birth to Brightbill, but yet there is that mother child connection, and there's still that love that's still there.
So I mean, so you have really three different kind, and in these particular movies, I mean, there are obviously others, but the three that sort of came to our minds between the Iron Giant and Wild Robot and the Crew. We haven't really gotten to CROODS yet, but I mean, there are three different kinds of sort of themes that Christians might resonate with. So you have a sacrifice and a sort of resurrection in the Iron Giant, and you have a similar or a related kind in the Wild Robot, although I would tend to view it more in terms of sort of vocation, especially parental vocation. But then in CROODS: A New Age, like as you said, there's not like an obvious. I feel like it in some ways it's like how many people might kind of combine actually, say an evolution, right? You have these CROODS who are like, and there's even jokes about it, like we're more fully evolved or whatever, right? In the movie, so it's almost like how people might view like a combination of like sort of evolution and Christianity, like. In a fairly obvious way. I don't know if this is where the story came from, but that there were precursors or predecessors to Adam and Eve like type figures, and so it's, to me, that's what struck me about the beginning part. I didn't see the original one, so I don't know how that goes, but they come to an Eden, a paradise, which literally the Greek word for paradise means a walled garden. So, I mean, that's probably not too far off from. I don't know how intentional those things were, but
right, because it is kind of like there's this. It's dark, gloomy, land that they've kind of lived in, and then they get behind this wall, and it just kind of essentially it just opens up, and it's completely different color palette that they're using. I mean, there's everything's bright green, bright colors, and everything's like new, fresh, and they kind of walk in, and these they meet this couple and their daughter,
and they're better.
They're the Bettermans, and they do
Emphasis
everything
on the
better.
Emphasis on the better. Even though like it's about their name, like Better Man, and then they're like emphasis on the Betterman, right?
Yeah.
Like, but
yeah, and then go ahead. You can.
Well, but so but then when Eep, which honestly because I hadn't seen the first one, for the first 20 minutes I thought it was Eve. I thought that her name was Eve. And she was with a guy named Guy. I mean, okay, so I was like, okay, Guy and Eve. I mean, Adam and Eve, right? Like that's how it sort of. But anyway, when she takes Dawn out of the wall, there is sort of like there's sort of impressive it's not like a barren wasteland outside, right? They're sort of these impressive creatures, butterfly type tree things or whatever they are. Honey, like, oh, she does get stung, but so it's not entirely a wasteland outside,
right?
But
so
what originally struck you though? But what originally struck you when you were watching it that you're like, this is Adam and Eve?
Well, I think the big thing was the forbidden fruit.
Okay.
Well, they walk in and it's kind of like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Like you can have anything you want. Just take a bite. Look at all these fruits, these amazing fruits that you've never had. You can have anything you want. Oh, except for this one fruit that you can't have. And why can't I have it? You just can't have it.
Yeah.
You just don't eat it. Eat anything else, but you can't eat this one.
I mean, it's clearly, I mean, at least to me, it was clearly sort of a biblical reference, even though I don't, again, like you were saying, I don't know how you would not get that. But people, like, okay, the punch monkeys are, because they're because they're the bad guys. Like, so okay, so they, like, it doesn't.
So it does veer.
I'm not saying the line, the story doesn't line up, but that part of it, like you say, that's
in the Bible,
like,
in the Bible they do leave out the punch monkeys. I think is what happened.
Yeah, that's the one part that's different. But there is a threat. There's some kind of threat. So like that aspect of the story, even though obviously, because so they're not just retelling the story of Adam and Eve, but there is a paradise, there's a garden, there's a certain fruit you can't eat, and
for an unknown reason. When they come in, they're like, "Why can't I eat this?" You just can't.
Yeah, because that's the one rule.
Right.
So I mean so I think that it's interesting because it takes a biblical motif or a biblical, it's not really a theme, but it's an aspect of a biblical story, and they use that to sort of further the particular story plot that's in this particular. So because really outside of that, and if I suppose you could say from within the world of the story, once he eats the bananas, that's where everything goes badly. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, in the movie, what actually made things go badly was stealing the water and channeling it into making the paradise in the first place. So, I think it's a little ambiguous in terms of what the overall point is, but you certainly see the borrowing of this idea. Don't eat that because then bad things will happen. But.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Do you think they're using Adam and Eve just to progress the story, and they needed something to happen, and it just so happens that this kind of fits in, or do you think it's a case where they have this film and they're like, well, how can we fit Adam and Eve into it? I mean, I don't know. I tend to think it's the first one. I don't know. It just kind of seemed to fit in, and they're going to borrow parts of it. Because it doesn't, like I kind of mentioned earlier, it doesn't really bring us to Christ. It doesn't show of Christ's love for us or anything like that.
Right.
But it is.
What's interesting is, I mean, I don't know how many people would sort of get from Adam and Eve to that anyway, because.
True. Yeah.
I mean the trend in biblical scholarship for a very long time has been dividing and dividing and dividing into separate, not only separate books, but separate pieces of books, and so that there's not really, although there's been sort of some return again and some sort of backlash against this, to view the whole thing as a whole, but that's not sort of maybe the most common way. And so, I'm not sure most people would really try to get there from here,
Mm-hmm.
But if you're talking about like origins stories of the human race or of people in general, you sort of have to reckon with the fact that here's a particular long tradition of one kind of origin. And so it makes sense, I think, to bring those into some kind of clash. And here is sort of one. So, I mean, here's a sort of a wider, crazy kind of metaphysical sort of. You've got the clash of, for a lot of Christians at least, evolution and creationism, right? So you could view it in that way. I don't know if anybody wants to or why they would necessarily choose to, but you could, right? Like you've got the CROODS, who is sort of like the vision of like evolving humanity out of the cave girls, whatever he said. Why would you say it like that? Like it's a bad thing. But then you have sort of these developed people who live in a paradise, and there's a clash between them. I mean, there's I don't know if that's there, but you could probably read it there, because it's kind of a common thing, like religion and science, or science, evolution and creation, or whatever. I think it's an interesting question. Who knows what the authors have in mind there?
Yeah, and it is interesting, because I think once they have escaped the garden, they do kind of, their two lifestyles do tend to kind of like mesh and come together, and there is some like they give up a little. Okay, all right, we'll do this. We do see that maybe you were right on this point. Maybe we'll lay back on this, and we'll adopt some of the things that you were doing. Maybe not so much others.
Finally, it's a story about like it's like in-laws, right? Where you have two entirely different families who come together, and they're connected in ways that they wouldn't naturally choose to be connected, but so the clan or the tribe or whatever grows bigger rather than smaller. So like it's a nice story in the end.
Yeah, and I think it's very family driven. Like very strong family, keep the family together. Some other things like that.
But those are the cave, sort of the, it's interesting. The theme is, well, we've surpassed that. We want to be comfortable. We want privacy. I mean, it's kind of actually maybe a reverse of where our culture probably mostly is headed. It's kind of an interesting story in that way, which is not necessarily like just a Christian theme or something, but it's an interesting story that it kind of goes against the way that we tend to think. We tend to think of ourselves as individuals, and we join willingly, or we choose our families or our connections. That's the clash. Part of the clash in the movie is, we can, what do they call it? Sleep pile? Whatever.
Yeah.
Which does not sound fun to me at all. I don't want people touching me at all. But the the idea is that their family sticks together, and so
that's how they maintain. That's how they survive.
Part of it.
Yeah.
Kill survive.
I think. Kill survive. I think. Thinking about these themes, I think what I come back to is that Jesus told parables. When asked a lot of questions, I think his response was, well, let me tell you a story. And then you kind of decipher from his story, oh, he's talking about God's love for us. And I think in a lot of ways, that's kind of what these films are doing, ultimately, in a lot of different ways. Ways, sometimes more than others. But I think that's how I see it.
Yeah, and actually, to bring that back around, what you just said to what we were talking about earlier, I mean, the parables are the opposite of what you would expect in real life. So they're all about the kingdom of God, or about what God is doing. And so if you were to actually like carry out, like for example, a shepherd who leaves 99 sheep in the wilderness and goes to find one sheep, probably not a great shepherd. I mean, in real life, in the way that we like in the cost benefit analysis, not a positive one, because you just left 99 sheep to be devoured by wild animals in the wilderness to go find one sheep. Like in the real, quote, real world, this is not the way it would be probably carried out. Like we tend to think of parables as like, oh well, this is just an earthly story that has a nice heavenly meaning or whatever. But the fact is that a lot of the things that Jesus says in parables are contrary to everything that we would do in the world, in our real life. And so I think that's something else like to think about in terms of like what we watch, or what we appreciate, or what moves us, or what stories we resonate with. Might not be exactly the same stories that make us feel like we always did, or the things that we agree with, like that say exactly the same things that we would have said ourselves if it were us. I mean, if I were God, that's exactly what I would do, right? I mean, like maybe that's not the way it should be. And so I think that it's interesting then when the story sort of tells us something like, wait, is that what I really want to believe or think? Regardless of what the situation is, that maybe that might be closer to the parable than something that we already agree with. Because the people that Jesus is telling the parables to often are like, wait, what did you say?
Right.
It doesn't mesh with the way that they naturally think. And maybe there's a broader application to stories there, if we're talking from the perspective of the Christian faith, at least.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when he was telling these stories, it didn't automatically click for them as well.
The disciples are like, why do you tell these stories in parables? Why do you talk to the people in parables? And that's all. I think that's something that that Christians for sure ought to think about. Like, the disciples are not like, oh yes, now we understand because you told us a nice story. They're like, wait, what are you talking about? Tell us what it means. And so Jesus has to interpret it to him. And he's like, if you guys don't get it, I don't know who's going to. So I think there's something there that Christians ought to consider when we're talking about stories in general. That it may not be, oh, I understand that perfectly, that's exactly what I believe and think, and therefore it's good, versus maybe it's off of pushing me in a different direction. Again, not that those are automatically good one way or the other, but
yeah.
Anyway.
I guess, I don't know. In summation, I think it's good anytime these good themes these good biblical principles are reiterated in films, whether they're explicit or implicit, whether it's obvious or not obvious. I think it's, anytime you have good themes that are reiterated, I think it's good to just, good to see it in films.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's good to sort of cause us to like reconsider and think about things, because and it's like sometimes we're like, well, that's in the Bible, so it must be good. Well, okay, in what way?
Context. Yeah.
In what way is it good? And also, if it sort of like resembles something in the Bible, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what the Bible says. I mean, it'd be interesting to do like studies like what people think are in the Bible versus what they see, what they got from a movie, and yet these stories are still interesting to people. I mean, like, Aronofsky can make Noah a Noah film, and people are like, oh, let's talk about that. And I don't think Christians should be scared of this. Like, that's not in the Bible. I mean, okay,
Yeah.
every 10 Commandments, half of that movie's not in the Bible. So I mean, like, it wouldn't be 3 hours if we were only doing the biblical story, or however long that movie is. I don't know. So I mean, like, a lot of those things, like, just the fact that it's not in the Bible does not mean that there's something that is, because we don't treat other movies this way. So I just think we ought not to be sort of scared of it. Like, what I think the only thing that, like, protesting or getting mad about it does is drive more people to see it. The Last Temptation of Christ, that's the only thing that happened, is more people went to see it. So if you don't want people to see it, then just be quiet about it.
That's right. And I think anytime there's, like, the quote-unquote Christian film that comes out, I think one of the main things that people are thinking about or is, how is God going to be depicted, or how are Christians going to be depicted, and they want to be so quick to be like, no, that's not that's not really what it's not really what we're like, or that's not really what we're saying, or that's not biblical, or like biopics on like Luther. I think people are just want to pick it apart and say, well, did he really say that, or how did he say that, how's this coming apart, and then how much of it is artistic. So anyways,
we probably have more to say on those sorts of things that we have said in the past. But anyway, if you got a movie that particularly on this episode, an animated movie that you have seen that has some sort of theme that you think is interesting, comment. Maybe we'll do a part 2. If we get enough, maybe we'll do a part 2. Obviously, there are others besides obvious ones like Prince of Egypt or things like that. It's still a common subject for movies to be made. So if you got one, post it in the comments, send us an email, etc. saintcinema.com. Thanks for listening or watching.
All right, thanks.